All right, when to use Apex? The opposite question is a lot easier to answer, which is when do you not use Apex? And I already talked about this. In general, Apex should always be your second choice. You should always take a look at the setup menu and what can I accomplish in the setup menu as opposed to what am I going to program, okay? So in general, use declarative features. But often, those declarative features won't meet your business requirements. And therefore, one of the things you can do is you can think of Apex as many implementations as being a more powerful version of these different declarative features, okay? So for instance, if you need a more powerful validation rule, workflow rule, or sharing or assignment rule, we have Apex triggers that can do that kind of functionality for us. If you think about a standard controller, we have custom controllers and controller extensions where we can write object-oriented code, Apex code to handle that. You can create custom web services to implement logic up on the Salesforce servers. We can create email services, and then you could create something like a complex sort of report by creating SQL queries and something like a custom controller, okay? So let me walk you through. What I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through 10 different scenarios where you reach that point at which the declarative feature falls short in terms of the capabilities that Apex has, okay? Now the list of the number of reasons as to why you'd want to use Apex is infinite, okay? So, I'm showing you 10. That doesn't mean there's only 10. That doesn't mean there's only 100. When you reach that point, you then go, okay, now I need to use Apex, all right? All right, so here's use case number 1. You want to do a field update, but you want to do it on other records. So if we're going to do a workflow rule and doing a field update, we can always operate on the current record, and if it's a detail in a master detail relationship, we can operate on the parent. But if it's a lookup relationship, or if we have children that we want to modify, or if we have some record that's not even associated via a relationship, we can use Apex to modify those records. Pretty common thing, modify children, upon a change occurring to a parent. We want to do data-driven sharing. So one of the great features that came out a couple of years ago is criteria-based sharing. But criteria-based sharing is still static in the sense that you can say, okay, if this field equals this, or if this amount is greater than that, share it with these people. It's still pretty static. What if the person that I want to share the record with is on the record? On a position, we have a field called the hiring manager, and that's a lookup to the user table. We want to share the record with that user. You can't do that using a criteria-based sharing rule, okay? So we can make it dynamic to either grant access, modify access, or for that matter, revoke access, okay? Let's say you want to create a multi-step wizard. So here's an example. When you think about when you buy an airplane ticket, you don't go to a page layout and fill out a form and then purchase the ticket. No, you go through a multi-step wizard. You indicate when and where you want to go. You indicate what flight you want to take. You then pick a seat. You then enter in your frequent flyer information. You enter in your credit card information, right? So if we want to create a complex multi-step wizard, the way we can do that and keep track of state is by using a custom Visual Force controller, which is an Apex class, okay? We want to do a call out to an external web service. If we want to call one of your web services, so let's say you're a customer and you have an SAP system, you have an integration server, whatever the case may be, if we want to call that web service, the mechanism by which we do that is Apex. So we can query external systems, we can update them, we can do a SOAP call out, we can do a RESTful call out, but Apex is the mechanism that we do call outs. Let's say we want to implement a custom web service. So for some reason, we need to have some business logic in a custom web service that we need to execute for some other integration from some other system. So Salesforce already provides us with the standard APIs, and they are built specifically to not include business logic. It's all about CRUD operations. It's all about operating on the data layer, which is, how you should be designing your solutions. But if you do need to do something like some custom transactional logic up on the Salesforce system, we can do that in Apex. Apex is the mechanism by which we define custom web services. Once again, either SOAP or REST-based. You want to automate creating records, or you want to automate deleting records. So in the case of things like field updates, it doesn't do inserts of records. It only does updates to fields, right? So if when this thing gets created, we want to automate creating something else, Apex Trigger is the way to go. You want to clean, you want to repair records, on a scheduled basis. You could use Data Loader. You could pull out the data and then do some sort of transformation logic on some sort of external script, and then push it back into Salesforce. But that's not necessarily that's a lot of work to pull the data out and do all that. Wouldn't it be great if we could just write some code up on the Salesforce servers and not have to worry about the whole data I/O thing? Let's just do the logic there. So we want to identify duplicate records and merge them into a single copy and maybe delete the loser. We want to transform records in some sort of way, like we want to take a look at something and apply a record type or something like that. We can do that. All right. You want to have a custom email handler. So when an email comes into Salesforce, you have things like Salesforce has its email to case types of features. But if you want the ability to execute logic upon receiving that email, you can create what's called an email service, code that logic into the method that receives the email, and then do whatever it is that you want to do. Okay? Let's say that you have a Visualforce page and you want to create some sort of custom button that, performs some action which can only really be defined within Apex. Okay? So by default, our standard controllers do the CRUD operations. Your saves, your cancel, your view, right? What this can do for you is you can create your own custom action. Maybe it sends emails. Maybe it does a web service call out to some other system to check on something. Whatever that case may be, we can code that custom logic, change navigation, by creating methods in Apex. Right. Let's say you want to do some complex validation. So you want to have a validation rule that fires not only when a record is inserted or updated, but also when a record is deleted. Validation rules don't do that. Maybe you want to have some complex logic in a database query in order to identify what is the definition of a good record versus what is the definition of a bad record. Okay? Another situation where we would want to do this. Okay? What is the biggest difference between Apex and most programming languages? In your opinion, what is the biggest difference?
The biggest difference by far is it doesn't compile or run locally.
Yeah, okay, so it is a language that wasn't ported to the cloud. It wasn't modified to run on the cloud. It only runs up on the Salesforce servers. Okay, so it was a programming language built from scratch to run on the Salesforce, the server environment. Okay, what else? What are some other top? Governors, right? So because Salesforce is a multi-tenant environment, so we have shared resources that give us all that scalability. We have governors to prevent transactions from doing inefficient operations. Very good.
It's proprietary and has got very limited business functionality, not extensive?
So it's I'll state that in a more positive way, but it it natively hooks into the Salesforce platform, providing it with the ability to, whether it's implicit connections to the database, automatic, data types based on your objects, the ability to, for instance, prevent records from being written to the database, programmatically kick off approval processes, all these different sort of hooks into your Salesforce applications are built into Apex. Very good. Very good. All right. Good job. It's also case insensitive. That's another big one. And another big one is that we'll talk about this in more detail later. It requires that you create tests. In my opinion, that's number 2. Governor's number 1. The fact that you're required to create tests is number 2. And at least from a developer standpoint, that's the one that's going to be the biggest change on your life. Okay? Can Apex be authored in a production org? Yeah. You're not supposed to. Technically, yes, but can it be executed in any production org? Well, Apex is only supported in Enterprise, Unlimited, and Developer Edition, unless you're using a managed package that has Apex, in which case you can run it in Professional and Group Edition and so on. So, how about this? What are the ways that Apex can be invoked? Triggers. So,
Web service.
custom web service.
Visual Force page.
Visual Force page, calling a Visual Force controller. Very good.
Batch.
Batch. Well, what calls batch? Batch doesn't kick off by itself.
Scheduler.
Scheduler. Yeah. Bulk API could modify records, but that's going to fire off triggers, and we already got that one. All right. So we got DML firing off a trigger. We got Visual Force page calling a controller. We got custom web service, and we got the scheduler.
There's the anonymous thing.
Ah, so that's how you could execute batch Apex. It's one of the ways you can execute batch Apex. Is if you have an anonymous block, you can create a little thing and call the execute batch method. And then there's also email services. Okay, email services is another one. All right, very good, very good. Why are governor limits important?
They can take down.
Yeah. So all of you, by the end of this course, will be able to write perfect Apex code. But you don't want other people to write bad Apex code that negatively affects your perfect Apex code, right? All right. So, we don't, we don't want, basically, Salesforce, you can go out to trust.salesforce.com. We have great response time and performance, and we want to, ensure that as much as we can for our customers. One of the ways that we do that is to prevent inefficient operations, so other people's code, preventing your code from operating properly. How are they applied? How are governors applied? Per what? Per transaction, right? And so when we're thinking per transaction, it might be, it might be a sequence of different things that occur, like we had here. The controller called a class. The class did a DML, which fired off a trigger, fired off another trigger. All of this is one transaction. One transaction. All right? What features did I show you in the Force.com ID?
It has got test executed.
Execute tests.
Anonymous block.
Execute anonymous blocks.
It has got help.
It's got help. I'm going to accept that. Yeah. Good.
Refresh and save to server.
Yeah, so that synchronization capabilities where we're saving to the server, checking conflicts, syntax.
Has not got project creation.
Create projects, yeah, so we can create projects which contain, different components.
There's data model browser.
Schema browser, exactly. So that tool for browsing our objects and our fields. and then executing queries, right? All right, when should you not use Apex as a solution?
When declarative is not available.
Yeah, when you can solve the problem declaratively, all right? So